Okay,
Okay.
we are
We
ready
are
to
ready
go.
to go.
Hi,
Hi,
everyone.
everyone.
This is
This
the
is the
select board meeting of November 9th.
With me is Megan Birchmont-Michael and Zach Burns. Tim Salvi is with us by Zoom.
And our associate Courtney Fresha is not feeling well and will not be joining us tonight. So first on the agenda is public input. Anybody in the audience or on the screen have any comments? Not seeing any, okay. Just a few announcements from me. Thanks to everyone who helped at the recent town meeting. Terrific turnout. Thank you to everyone who came. Special thanks to Linda Hathaway and Deb, oh my gosh, Deb Scythe, blank, for getting it all set up and smooth. Dave Walrath, our town moderator, and obviously Denise for everything to make it a really quick meeting. We were also grateful it was quick, so thank you all. Want to congratulate our newest Fire Academy graduates, Richard Falcioni, Tim Benoit, and Cameron Bauer for just finishing their program at the Fire Academy and will be back with us at the fire department. And a reminder, the Neshoba Rotary Club is holding a drive-through veterans lunch this Thursday outside First Parish Church. You do need to pre-register, so if you haven't already, please email info@neshobarotary.org or check their website for details. And I, having just spoken to Daisy Dearborn, who was one of the people who made it happen, I invite everybody else to stop by the Veterans Memorial in front of Randall Library and to thank the veterans in your life. With that, did you have an announcement about?
Yes, I wanted to share with everyone, we had received an email from the superintendent of schools that now that the COVID-19 vaccine is available for students or for everyone aged 5 to 11. The Neshoba Boards of Health is hosting a clinic for Neshoba Elementary School students on Friday, November 12th at the Neshoba Regional High School from 3 to 6. And then the second one will be on Friday, December 3rd at Neshoba High School from 3 to 6 as well. The goal is to provide additional vaccine times for families who might not have been able to find them through their pediatricians or through other means. It is for Neshoba students, and a link is going to be sent out to families on Wednesday, November 10th. I just wanted to share as the representative parent of a child in Neshoba, that this is very exciting, and so we obviously hope that parents will take advantage of this clinic as an additional opportunity to vaccinate their children.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Neshoba. Do you have anything? Okay, and so,
Chair,
yes,
Madam Chair, could I
Yes.
offer something?
please. You just muted yourself. There you go.
Mark Roberts and his dog Mocha finished up their trek across Massachusetts on Sunday in Provincetown. And they are back in Stow. I know Mark is very tired, as one would expect. And I believe that they raised significantly over $100,000 for hunger.
That's great. Amazing. That's very exciting. Congratulations, Mark and Susan and Mocha, if you're watching. You've earned the rest. Our first on our agenda is a certificate of appreciation to Dorothy Sonicksen, who has decided to step down from her current boards, but so we wrote our certificate, and Dorothy is here with us, so I want to read this first. On this 9th day of November 2021, the Stow Selectboard hereby expresses its sincere appreciation to Dorothy Sonicksen for 41 years of service as trustee and treasurer of the Randall Relief Fund, Town Fund, and Town Farm Fund. She's also served as a member of the Stow Cultural Council from 2004 to 2010. Working discreetly and behind the scenes, Dorothy has contributed in multiple ways to the fabric of life in Stow, quite literally as a quilter and member of the local spinning and weaving group, as a member of the Garden Club, as a member of the Stow Historical Society, for which she also served as treasurer. She also plays the harp and has performed at local events. On behalf of the entire town, the Select Board would like to thank you, Dorothy, for the many ways you have enhanced and encouraged the cultural life of our town and for your quiet devotion to the needs of all its residents. Thank you so much, Dorothy. It's not going to be the same with you on these boards, but I hope we keep seeing you around, because you're not leaving town, are you?
She's muted.
You want to say anything? You are muted, but you're welcome to say something if you want or not.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the acknowledgement. It's been my pleasure to serve. And I will continue to be around and be helpful where I can.
Great, thank
So
you.
thank you.
And it's been, I know that I think I met you through the Stow Conservation Trust, but you have been around ever since I moved to town, and I appreciated all you've done for us, so thank you, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And we will have a certificate for you, once our other two board members can sign it, we will get that to you.
Great.
Great, thank you. The next good news tonight is we are having an appointment for our new fire chief, John Paul Benoit, known as JP as far as I know to everyone, to both fire chief, emergency management officer, and forest warden through June 30, 2024. Denise, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I mean, the letter that's in the packet, pretty much explains our process, so, Dolores spearheaded the search committee. We had 18 resumes, they interviewed 5 in-person candidates. The consensus among the committee was that JP was the standout choice. I concur, met with him several times prior to making this recommendation. I think he is I know he's very well respected in the community, he's very well respected through the fire services, so I am pleased and honored to recommend him for the fire chief position, contingent upon successful negotiations. So I ask that you reaffirm the appointment, we will have contract negotiations, and then we would schedule a public swearing in similar to what we did for the police chief.
Great. And I just want to add, I mean, JP is known to everybody, I think, in town, but not only is in the fire department, but obviously the Boy Scouts. And for people who might be new to town and know him, from their kids now in the Boy Scout, but, thank you for all that leadership as well. You bring on a whole nother generation of scouts, and I think Stowe is really proud of our Troop 1, so. Anybody else want to add anything?
No,
Well, then I will
very excited.
take a motion.
I move to appoint John Paul J.P. Benoit to the position of Fire Chief, Emergency Management Officer, and Forest Warden through June 30th, 2024, contingent upon successful contract negotiations.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Great.
Congratulations. We were glad to have you. And hopefully we can do the outdoor public ceremony before it gets too cold, right? All right, great. Thank you for coming, Karen, and Gary, thanks for coming. Okay, the next is to appoint call firefighters and EMTs. We have 2, Stephen Laaper and John Kennedy, so I guess, are either of them
I
here?
have Stephen Laaper.
Steve, great,
John could not make it tonight.
okay.
Great.
Steve, do you wanna say anything about your proposed appointment?
Thank you. I brand new resident to Stowe. We just moved here. I've been involved in the fire service since I turned 18
Wow.
in just a variety of different capacities, variety of different places. And I'm excited to be able to continue that here in Stowe.
Awesome, great,
Welcome.
Welcome and thank you for
Thank you.
stepping forward, that's great. So unless you have anything else to add, we'll just take a motion.
Nope. Great.
I move to appoint Stephen Laaper to the position of Call Firefighter EMT to the Stowe Fire Department through June 30th, 2022.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye,
Aye.
great, that passes, thank you, and again, thank you and welcome. And then for John Kennedy?
I move to appoint John Kennedy to the position of Call Firefighter EMT to the Stowe Fire Department through June 30th, 2022.
Second?
All in favor? Aye.
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 All right, great,
Excellent.
you got 2 more guys. All right. Thank you,
Excellent.
thank you all.
How quick?
We're too quick, we can't start that, right, we have to wait for the public hearing to sit.
I was gonna say, how quick can she do the TA's report?
I don't know, those are long.
I can do it in 7 minutes.
Can you do it in 7 minutes? All right,
Just need another cough drop.
all right.
And also do minutes.
Well, we could do minutes too.
Oh,
That's true, we
oh,
could do
that's
minutes,
true.
but.
Do minutes if you don't.
No, I can go through it.
Sure.
All right, so, as Ellen indicated earlier, I also wanna say a huge thanks to Linda and Deb and their team with the workers who set up and helped check everybody in and really oversaw the logistics for special town meeting. I wanna thank Jonathan Daisy and his Stow TV crew for the filming, and really the hearing impaired transcription setup and section. We got very positive feedback on that, which was great. I'd like to thank Ron Eld, our IT director, for setting up and running the electronic voting system. And I'd like to acknowledge Kathy Sfera and Jesse Stedman on their presentations for the 2 articles involving these unique and dynamic projects. A huge thanks to the 300 voters who turned up and act on this very important business of the town. I think we had 2 exciting articles which will just lead to so many exciting things here in Stow, and I look forward to the upcoming years and implementing what the voters acted on.
Great.
With OSHA coming out with their COVID vaccination requirements, at our next meeting, we will be putting forth a policy for the mandatory vaccination requirements. Dolores has been working on those in accordance with all of the legal requirements we need to adhere to. And that will be coming forward for the board. We have to have it in place by December 6th. So your next meeting will be the next and only opportunity to have this voted on. I am putting it forward as a formal policy because temporary is normally 6 months and this may extend past a 6-month window. So we will be asking you to vote on that. The library building project. So the building project is having a public forum next Thursday, November 18th at 7 p.m. Information is on our website under the calendar, and I will put it on the homepage in the next day or 2. We're working on a formal press release. At that forum, you will see 3 options that the architects have presented to the building committee. In a nutshell, one option will keep the entire existing structure, just bring it up to code and renovate some portions of the interior. One option will build up from the 1975 addition and build out where the existing children's area is to add 2 newer spaces. And the third option will actually demolish the 1975 addition and build a smaller 2-story addition that will allow for more functionality because it would be able to hold books and reconfigure in the space that 1975 space now. So the architects will be presenting those, looking for public feedback. The committee does plan to move forward for the annual town meeting and the annual election with this project. So I encourage folks to participate and get involved, look at the forum. For those who cannot make it, it will be recorded and will be replayed. And this is the first forum. They do intend to have several, obviously, on this topic as we go through the process. I am pleased to announce that Speaker Pro Tem Hogan has secured $300,000 for us to install water cisterns for firefighting operations here. She has secured that through the state's Arpa funds. So in addition to our funds that we will be discussing tonight, the state has a portion of money for infrastructure type projects. This obviously counts under water infrastructure and climate change because we obviously need resources when there is, God forbid, a fire in town. And lastly, COVID cases are on the rise here in Stow. Please consider taking all necessary precautions. I believe we have 34 active cases in town, which is up quite a bit from last week. I would expect to see an increase through the holidays and then hopefully that will level out. But as we can get the 5 to 11-year-olds vaccinated, hopefully that will counter some of those cases. But please continue to take all precautions and do your part to hopefully stop the spread. That's what I have on my list.
So, is the Board of Health considering asking for indoor mask mandates?
So I haven't spoken to Mary since this information just came out. The last time I'd spoken to her, on the advice of Neshoba Board of Health, the cases weren't significant enough for them to look at that. I don't believe they're meeting until next month, but I'd have to look and see if they're meeting. And I will follow up with them to see what their thoughts are.
The other question I had for you, which I meant to ask you before this evening, was the Public Safety Committee had one citizen opening on it, and we haven't seen that, right? We haven't filled that.
You know, no.
I know someone called me this weekend to ask about where that process is.
So the preference was someone who had engineering background. So we've only had a couple of candidates that really don't have much expertise. So I was giving it a little bit longer to see if we had somebody that had that type of experience that we could utilize. But that was the preference on the original posting.
Because I'm assuming that the staff people are the experts and that the citizen would sort of bring the citizen, driving the roads kind of perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think the participants that show up for every meeting are their citizens, because they do have quite a following.
Okay. Any other questions for Town Administrator?
30 seconds.
So, we are going to
Nothing
prepare
keeping
for
it
opening
on.
the hearing. Our first public hearing is gonna be on tax classification, then we have a second public hearing at 7:30 on a poll location for Hudson Light Power and Verizon. So, we're gonna wait to be very prompt, and then I will hopefully follow the instructions correctly. I have them in front of me this time as opposed to last time, so. Okay, so I'm going to open the public hearing. I'm gonna read the motion and then we'll go into the official hearing. So notice of tax classification hearing for November 9th, 2021. The Select Board will hold a public hearing on Tuesday, November 9th, 2021 at 7:15 PM in the Town Building, 380 Great Road, Stow, Mass, on the issue of tax classification. The purpose of the hearing is to allow taxpayers the opportunity to present their views on whether or not residential, commercial, industrial, open space, and personal property should be taxed with one rate for all property classes or to use different tax rates for different property classes. The hearing will include a presentation by the Board of Assessors outlining the options available under Chapter 40, Section 56 of the Mass General Laws. At the conclusion of the public hearing, the Select Board shall determine whether or not tax classification shall be applied for the fiscal year 2022 tax rate. Currently, the town taxes at a single tax rate for all property classes. All concerned taxpayers are encouraged to attend via Zoom to present their views orally or submit them in writing to the office. If there are questions about the hearing, please contact the Assessor's office. So I will ask for a motion to enter the public hearing.
So moved.
Second. And we need a roll call. Mr. Salvi?
Aye.
Mr. Burns?
Aye.
Ms. Burge McMichael?
Aye.
Ms. Sturgis, aye. We'll have a presentation by the Board of Assessors, and then I will ask the Select Board members for questions and comments. And then if there are people who want to speak, I will give you an opportunity. Just make sure you either raise your hand through the electronic thing or just wave it if you're on screen, so I know you want to talk. Kristen, it's all yours. Sure. Thank you.
All right. So before we get started, I always like to remind everybody that any and all tax rates that are discussed tonight are subject to Department of Revenue approval. So even though you choose a factor tonight, the tax rate still has to go through the approval process. Please round that in. Okay, so tonight we have to choose a minimum residential factor, which will maintain a single tax rate if we choose a factor of 1, or we can adopt a split rate and choose a factor of less than 1, which will shift the rate to a different class of property. The other options that are available tonight are, there is an open space discount, a small commercial exemption, and a residential exemption. However, in prior years, those things don't apply to Stow. We don't utilize the open space tax code. We don't have enough commercial properties to grant a small commercial exemption. And a residential exemption doesn't make sense in Stow because we're close to 100% owner occupied. So communities like Boston, you know, they have a lot of rentals. The waterfront communities at the Cape, they give residential exemptions for residents who live there year round. But like I said, Stow is almost 100% owner occupied. All right, next slide, thank you. Okay, so every year the assessors classify property according to its use in the 4 classes of property, which are residential, open space, commercial, industrial, and personal property. If you hear me refer to the CIP classes, that's commercial, industrial, and personal property. Next slide. Okay, so if we maintain a residential factor of 1, it's going to yield a tax rate of $19.57 per thousand of value. The formula for the tax rate is there. It's essentially the levy or the budget, what we're gonna spend, divided by the taxable value of the town, and that yields the single rate of $19.57 rounded. Stow can select a factor of less than 1, which will shift the burden to the CIP classes. Historically, Stow has chosen a minimum residential factor of 1. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are the options with the shift. So the first line shows the minimum residential factor of 1, which yields the single rate for both classes, residential and CIP. And then we can shift up to 150% of the burden. So the shift is shown in 10% increments. And as you can see on the last two columns on the right, the residential tax rate drops about 14 cents with each incremental shift, and the CIP tax rate climbs almost $2 with each incremental shift. So not a huge savings for the residential, but kind of a hard hit on the CIP side. Next slide when you're ready, Denise. Okay, so what does that do to the average tax bill? So for fiscal '22, the average single-family value is $556,900. With a single rate, that would have an estimated average tax bill of $10,899. And as you can see, with each 10% incremental shift, the tax rate doesn't really drop that much. It's about $80 with each incremental drop and a lower tax rate. Next slide, please. So what does that do to the commercial side? The average commercial value for fiscal '22 was $865,600. And with a single rate, the average commercial tax bill would be about $16,940. And again, with each 10% incremental shift, you're looking at an increase of about $1,800 for each incremental shift on the commercial side. And the difference between the maximum and the minimum shift is about $8,500, so it's a big difference. Next slide. So again, minimum residential factor of 1, the estimated tax rate would be $1,957. And again, has to be approved by the Department of Revenue, and the tax rate can change slightly during the approval process. It hasn't happened to us yet, but I always like to put it out there that it's possible, because you never know. All right, so average tax bill from last year to this year. So last year, the average single-family value was $531,500. That has increased to $556,900, or about $25,000, close to 5%. The tax rate has decreased from 1998 to 1957, a decrease of 41 cents or 2%. The average tax bill is increasing from $10,619 to $10,899, less than $300. And keep in mind, just because the tax rate goes down doesn't mean that everyone's tax bill is going to go down. Values go up, spending goes up. There's all kinds of factors involved. The levy has increased minimally, thanks to Denise's budgeting skills. We've only increased the levy about 2%, which is minimal. That's pretty much as level funding as you're gonna get. So next slide. So this is the single-family value distribution. There are 2,108 single-family homes in Stow, and this chart just kind of shows you where the assessed value distribution lies as a count and also as a percentage of the overall number. As you can see, the majority of the value lies between 400,000 and the 599,999, which makes sense because the average assessed value is now 556,900, so obviously that's where that's gonna fall. This is the first year that I've actually had to break down the 800, 900, and 1,000,000 classes because values are increasing. We now have 19 homes that are valued over $1 million, so
Yikes.
just it gives a better picture of how that curve kind of falls. Next slide, please. All right, so new growth. New growth is used in determining the levy limit every year, how much we can spend. New growth is defined as any item or structure which has not been previously taxed. So you're only gonna see new construction in this figure. If there's any changes due to valuation, they are not considered new growth. So this is just new stuff. This is decks, pools, new houses, additions, things like that. This is a 10-year picture of growth, and obviously this is the lowest growth we've had in 10 years, just for lack of not much going on. And I don't know if anyone remembers last year's classification hearing, but I did indicate that growth was declining. So hopefully we'll have some new projects soon and this will get better, but it is what it is at this point. I also like to indicate the revaluation years on that chart as well. Next slide.
Can you just say, just for a word about the reevaluation, there have been some questions about when that happens and why it happens.
Yeah, Denise, if you wanna just back that back. Okay, so revals used to be every 3 years. So we had one in 13, we had one in fiscal 16, and then right around fiscal 17, the Department of Revenue pushed revals out to 5 years versus 3 years. So we just had one last year in fiscal 21, we went through that complete audit process. We don't have another one now until fiscal 26, so.
Right, thank you.
And then this is sales activity in Stow, and I want to point out this is calendar year, not fiscal year. So assessed values are derived by analyzing the market. So for fiscal 22, those values were used, those values were arrived at by using 2020 calendar year sales. So as you can see, in 2019, we had 80 sales versus 68 in 2020, so that's dropped 15%. Days on the market has dropped almost by half, that's 42% drop. And the average sale price has increased from $574.5 to $609. This is just literally supply and demand, scarcity. When there's less inventory, it sells faster and people are willing to pay more. So, and those statistics are from MLS PIN. Next slide, which I believe is our final slide. So surrounding municipalities, how do we look compared to our neighbors? Pretty good, actually. This data, the last year of complete data is obviously the previous fiscal year, so this is fiscal 21 figures. Last year, the tax rate was $19.98. The average single-family tax bill was $10,618. And if you look at Acton, Bolton, Boxborough, we're pretty good shape. I mean, we're lower than Acton and Bolton, we're similar to Boxborough and Southborough. The line in the middle there, the communities below that line actually shift their tax rate, so that kind of gives you a picture of what their bills look like. For some reason, the last few years, the Department of Revenue has not had statistics available for Harvard and Sudbury. I don't know what's going on with them, but it's just not listed on their website, so those average tax bills are not available. And that is the last slide, so with that, I'll open it up to any questions or comments or anything like that.
Questions, anybody? As always, a
I
great
will- yeah, I know, I was
presentation.
gonna say,
Thank
as
you.
always, I feel like whenever Kristen comes.
Jim, do you have a question?
No, I just noticed as always, the numbers kind of speak for themselves. I do have one thing, Kristen,
Yeah.
those comparative tax rates to our neighbors, if my memory is correct, which it might not be, I think they used to, our neighbors with a substantial commercial tax rate used to have a significantly more different tax rate than ours. It seems like it's all closed up a little bit, am I right?
Yeah, it's definitely kind of tightening up, definitely, I would agree. I mean, in the past, usually the communities that shift the rate have a much larger commercial base than we do. I mean, if you look at Harvard, they're similar, they're lower than us. And same with, they might be the only one, I think. Sudbury is probably just about the same for a commercial base, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I will say this, I mean, if you wanna bring businesses into the town, a single rate is very attractive. Sometimes when a business is deciding where to go, a single or split rate could be the deciding factor for them, so.
Will we get a copy of your presentation?
Sure.
I can send it to you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it was just very helpful to have some of those numbers from people asking questions. No more questions from the
I
board?
don't have any, no.
Did you have anything? Any questions from the audience or from anybody on Zoom? No, okay.
I don't know if someone's trying to speak, someone unmuted themselves, but. Kay Cantor, if you have anything to add?
Nope.
Nope, they went back into meeting, okay.
Okay. Okay, so let's see, I'm just gonna make sure I'm doing this right. So, I guess now we could get a vote before we close the hearing. We can actually vote. Do we do the hearing first and then we vote? That's what was unclear on my directions. Okay, all right, so can I have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor, and this is a roll call. Mr. Salvi?
Aye.
Mr. Burns?
Aye.
Ms. Birch McMichael?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the hearing is now closed, and I will take a motion on the tax classification.
Madam Chair, based on information from the Board of Assessors, I move that the town of Stow adopt a minimum residential factor of 1 to keep a single tax rate for the fiscal year 2022, taxing all property classes at one rate.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, that's unanimous. Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you, Kristen.
Great presentation as always. Okay, so now we have a minute or two before our next classification. We could deal with the minutes.
Yeah.
Might as well keep this process moving. So these are the minutes of, I gotta get the date in front of me.
October 26th.
October 26th, thank you. Any questions, comments, changes?
No, wow, so many policies.
I did have one thing,
Yep,
trying to find it, bear with me.
all right.
On page 2, under the disclosure form for Daniel Nicholson, continued matter in the third, from the last line of the second paragraph, it says that I expressed my dislike, but said that I will vote for it. I prefer if we put in a reason for that. And I'd like to suggest, after it says he will vote for it because of the de minimis value.
Yes, great. Okay, any other changes to the minutes? Otherwise, I will take a motion to approve as amended.
Madam Chair, I move to accept the meeting minutes of the October 26, 2021 meeting as, with amendments, specifically after the sentence, Board Member Salvi expressing his dislike for the process, but saying he will vote for it, to add in because of its de minimis value.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, great. Those are done, and now I'm just pulling up the motion for the next hearing. Okay, this is a public hearing to discuss the location of utility poles. Notice is hereby given in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 166, Section 22, that the Select Board will conduct a public hearing regarding a pole locations request by Hudson Light and Power Department to locate utility poles as follows. Brook Road, Stow, locate one pole at a point approximately 110 feet southwest of existing pole number 5 to serve new construction at 38 Brook Road. On Great Road, Stow, locate one pole at a point approximately 125 feet west of existing pole 152 to reduce the overall span of overhead conductors and retain height compliance over the roadway. Also, that permission be and hereby is granted to each of said petitioners to lay and maintain underground laterals, cables, and wires in the above or intersecting public ways for the purpose of making connections with such poles and buildings as each of said petitioners may desire for distributing purposes. The public hearing will be held on Tuesday, November 9th, 2021, at or after 7:30 p.m. at the Stowtown Building, 380 Great Road, Stow, Mass. Public may attend the meeting in person and may continue to participate via remote Zoom access. Okay, so I will ask for a motion to enter the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, Mr. Salvi,
Aye.
Mr. Burns.
Aye.
Ms. Birch McMichael.
Aye.
I say aye, and that is, we are open. So we'll have a presentation, I believe, by Hudson Light and Power, then ask the Select Board for questions. Is someone, a representative here?
Yes.
Back to my.
Yeah, I'm here.
pictures.
Chris
Great.
Monsini here from Hudson Light and Power.
Hi, Chris. So I know we got all the maps, and for those, maybe just a simple explanation of why you need to do this?
Sure thing, yeah, I don't have much of a presentation. I
Yeah,
sent
that's
over a
fine.
pretty basic diagram or design, I should say, for each. Hopefully, you guys have access to those.
Yes.
So the first one was on Brook Road. There's a new construction going in at Brook. I believe it's a single-family home, if I recall correctly. It'll be number 38 Brook. And in order for us to serve that new construction, we'll need to have a new pole set as specified in our petition shown on the design. As you read already, it would be at a point approximately 110 feet southwest of existing pole number 5. And that would be for the purpose, again, to serve 38 Brook Road.
Great.
And then the other one, completely unrelated. These are not, oh yeah, there we go. Thank you very much for doing that.
Yeah, you can. Here's the,
Yep, and so this is the Great Road one. This is something that one of our line supervisor identified in the last outage we had out in that area. I believe a tree came down and damaged one of the poles near this span. So you can't really see obviously in this basic design, but this span between pole 152 and 153 is about 225 feet. Obviously with such a span that long, you have some sag in the middle of the conductors. And you know, with the damage out there, that kind of knocked things out of whack as well. We really don't like to have spans over, you know, I'd say 150 feet. So this is pretty significant, you know, over what we would like to have. And in order to just ensure that our conductors stay up, you know, with the right clearances over the sidewalk and over the communication wires, you know, putting a new pole in the middle of that span would obviously help accomplish that. So that's the purpose for this.
Great. And if people can't read it, it just, it's in the area on Great Road near Hiley Brook Road as well. So that's
Yes.
the road coming into the
Yes.
south. Great.
Just a coincidence that these two are completely unrelated
Okay,
to one another.
great. Other questions from the board?
No.
Just have one quick question.
Sure.
I noticed that Verizon New England Inc. did not sign. Are they all clear on this as well? So if we approve tonight, both you and Verizon are all set to go?
Yeah, from what I understand, so I did talk with Terry Dolan. He's a pole engineer and for Verizon for this territory. From what I understood from him, they wouldn't have any issues. It's just they take a lot longer to process paperwork. So I sent the petitions to them along with an internal document that we use to exchange information called the 605. And they, you know, verbally on the phone, they had no issues with it because it's Hudson Light and Power's pole set and maintenance area. So we would be the ones setting the pole. They would just be attaching to it. So it would benefit Verizon in the same way that it's benefiting us by keeping the clearance on Great Road and for serving 38 Hiley Brook as well.
I think we would be more concerned with Verizon if it was replacing an existing pole, but because they're not moving anything from one pole to another, these are new, we're not as concerned about getting their signatures.
And we did have signed off.
Okay, if I receive the documents with their signatures before you guys, I'll obviously forward them along to you as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes. Mr. Salvi?
just an orientation question. If the map on 38 Hiley Brook Road if this is oriented correctly with north above, I'm having a difficult time understanding where Great Road is. It would be to the south or at the bottom, is that right?
You know, that's a great question. I
Oh,
can
you
answer
can
that.
look at it like it is on mine.
Well, if that's the
Uh,
wetland,
Oh, sorry, you're on a different one.
I'm just looking at hers. Does that give
That
you a
one,
better
I
sense
see.
from? I'm assuming that that's wetland over on the left, which would be on the west side? If I remember Hiley Brook, right? Oh, actually, well,
I'm just logging into my system
Okay.
right now, so I could tell you exactly. I apologize that I didn't have that handy
it's
for
okay.
your question.
I mean, based on the number, I'm assuming Great Road is at the bottom and this is relatively close, but I wanna make sure that I know where it is.
So,
Can you-
Good.
Yeah, that wetland would be Elizabeth Brook, right?
Yeah, though it does go underneath it, so,
let me share that screen, hang
but
on.
it's a wide, they make it look on that
Yes, it
picture,
could actually be this,
because it shows us this big,
because it could be.
yeah, that's what I
There
said.
you go.
Oh.
So it was right about here. Can you see? So it's halfway. If I do.
Thank you.
So just around the brook, basically. around
So
the
that's
crossing.
41, so
Yeah, that's 41.
right across the
Just,
street.
just north of Lantern Lane, so,
Yes.
okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
About halfway.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions from the board?
I think somebody.
Is there
Somebody on Hiley Brook.
questions from the audience? Any people like to ask a question or speak on this topic?
Hi, I have a quick question if I may.
Could you identify
Name's Mike
yourself?
Smith.
Yeah.
I'm one of the abutters over at 41 Highland Brook Road, right across the street from where the pole is gonna go in.
Okay, sure, please.
The only questions I had is, we're being told now that a pole is needed to support the construction. That wasn't what was said during the site plan approval process. They were gonna tap in right off of pole 6 and do an underground line. That's the one directly across from our property. And we spent an incredible amount of time discussing that plan too, because we were pretty convinced they're gonna have to tear out all the trees to do it. Cause they were telling us it was gonna be an underground mine. We spent weeks talking about it, but eventually, decided that that was the only location where they were gonna be able to get power, and we went forward with the approval on it. And well, now all of a sudden, it seems like 11th hour, we got a house 95% complete over there, the siding, windows, roof, and everything are on it, and now we're throwing in another pole. So I'm just confused why the sudden change of heart.
That's a great question on it, and honestly, I don't have a good answer for you. I apologize. Who, if you don't mind, who was at this meeting, as a representative?
Approval, it was a Hammerhead spinoff. 44 was the original lot. 38 was created as part of a Hammerhead approval process, and 38 is the A&R. But when the A&R was created, there was covenants placed by the planning board. It was a planning board process. This went on, completed back in March, I believe. And if you talk to Jesse Stedman, he can forward the decision over to you. It has a site plan and everything attached to it, but it shows them digging an underground right and taking a tap off the existing transformer that we're fed from, burying it and feeding the house that way right from that location. So now it's all of a sudden we need to put in a pole and do something else. And my concern would be if that's what has to be done, it's fine. You know, it's a technical problem, you have to solve it, fine. The only concern I would have is that that's a no-cut buffer as specified in the site plan. It's a 60-foot deep no-cut buffer and very strict provisions about how wide the driveway can be, all laid out in the site plan. So just want to make sure that everything's jiving out in terms of what the binding conditions of building on the lot are and what we're about to do.
So the planning board offered no comment on these two hearings, or two polls. So they were not concerned with them.
And I'm sorry, here was the last comment, you said something about the setback, the 60-foot, what was that?
You know, there were several provisions placed on the site plan when it was called Site 1 at the time, which is now 38 being created. There was a 60-foot no-cut buffer placed between the road and where they were allowed to start cutting to clear for the property construction. There was 30-foot set limit to how wide the opening could be in the existing stone wall that was there to create the driveway cut. There was a lot of discussion about the driveway. Initially, the planning board wanted to come back with a shared driveway of what was existing at 44, but then eventually that was abandoned. We went into a separate driveway, placed rules on it. There were a few other provisions placed there about where construction vehicles could park and other things. So there's a whole list of findings and conditions that the planning board did when they approved a special permit to create the hammerhead at 44.
Thank you for that. I understand that we got an email from Jesse saying that he had no comment, but I'm concerned about moving forward if we don't have confirmation, if there was terms to the planning board agreement.
Madam Chair, could I make a suggestion?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Salvi.
I think what the gentleman is saying is very important. I think we could perhaps do both by just any motion to approve would be conditioned on double checking that HLP's plan is not inconsistent with site approval conditions on either 38 or 44 Hiley Brook Road.
that seems like a good way to address this. I like that, thank you, Mr. Salvi. And I don't know how to pronounce your last name, Telizevsky?
Nolszewski, pretty close.
Okay. Would that, I mean, is that, I assume that's sort of what you were hoping for, that we just confirm what the terms were of the planning board decision?
Yeah, I just want to make sure everyone's aware that that everything was set there, because it was a long, long process. So I want to make sure it's just honored.
The special permit
And
decision's
also,
online.
my only
I'm looking
concern
at it
is
now.
that if you have to put in a pole, it's fine. I
Yeah.
honestly don't care. But just as long as no more trees really are coming down along the road or making the road wider to do this new work, or the driveway I meant make the driveway wider to do this new work.
Right, okay. Do you have more information?
No, I'm
to
sorry,
share
I'm
with us?
just, I'm taking a look at the decision. I was just trying to
So
see if I
I
could
think,
find it, but-
just
but I
for
think-
purposes of moving this along, that we will take Mr. Salvi's suggestion with a motion and then make sure that that gets clarified before Mr. Mancini, we can suggest that you guys can move forward. Is that okay with you all? That makes sense?
And, yes.
So if there's no more comment, any other comments from the public or from the board for that matter? So I will ask for a motion to close the public hearing.
I move that the public hearing for installation of poles at Great Road and at Hiley Brook Road be closed.
And I will take a roll. Mr. Salvi?
Second.
Oh.
Aye.
Aye. Mr. Burns?
Aye.
Ms. Burge McMichael?
Aye.
Ellen says aye. Okay, so the hearing is now closed and I will take a motion on the proposal.
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve and sign the applications by Hudson Light and Power to install new poles at Great Road and at Hiley Brook Road as indicated in the order for joint or identical pole location for each site received by the Select Board Office October 28th, 2021, conditioned that the application is not inconsistent with the site plans at either 38 or 41 Hiley Brook Road.
Second.
Does that, the wording work for everybody that's involved in this? Mr. Salvi, does that sound right to you?
Yes, it did.
And Denise, that's good? Okay. So I will take a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
All right, that's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Chris, for being with us and clarifying that, and thank you for Mr. Telizevsky for raising that, and we will make sure that that gets clarified.
Great, thank you all for having us, and hopefully next time I can join you in person.
Great.
Good to,
Look
good
forward
to see
to it.
you all.
Thank
Great,
you.
Thank you.
Great night.
Okay, so, oh yeah, we get, next is accepting donations on behalf of the Hallowed Point purchase. Always fun. Denise.
And if I may, so I will ask that your motion for the Lake Boone Association be amended to 80,000.
Wow.
The total cost is just under, or the total funds is just under at 79,607.50. The total project cost, including the land purchase, legal work, survey work, and the startup stewardship, came to $1,028,312.50. Of that, we received $629,950 from Kendall Homes for the sale of the lots, $33,255 from Stow Conservation Trust, 10 of which they'll retain for the CR and the stewardship. $79,607.50 from Lake Boone Association. $500 from Saji Johnson, who made a donation to the town. And so the ask for CPA funds will be $285,000, down from the original $400,000 that was appropriated. So great work for everybody with that. So I ask that you accept these donations and we can pretty much close out this project.
Great.
Awesome.
May I ask
Okay.
a quick question on the motion?
Yes.
Do we need to also accept the 500 or was that just a donation?
So it was a gift, it wasn't necessarily a donation, so you do not need to accept that separately.
So you want, oh, would you like to make a motion?
I move that the select board vote to accept donations on behalf of the Appoint purchase, specifically $33,255 from Stow Conservation Trust, with $10,000 going toward the land stewardship and $22,255 toward the purchase of the property, and up to $80,000 from the Lake Boone Association for the purchase of the property and to cover legal expenses.
Second.
And I just say, wow, this is a very impressive project to begin with, and the fundraising, really, everybody involved from, and particularly from Stowe Conservation Trust and Lake Boone Association. Thank you so much for all that work. And again, I would say thank you to Kathy and the team that really pulled together this project. Really well done. Thank you. Any other comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, motion passes.
Excellent.
Terrific. Okay, so, now we're back to police department policies. It's been so long.
I know, right?
Chief Solisi, glad you could join us again.
Thank you, appreciate being here. I'll sit in the front this time.
Yeah. So, let's see, we have two. The first is U&T visa certification policy. Do you want to just give us the overview of what they are and we can have questions?
Sure. So part of the laws that we've been reviewing and what our policies are, one of the policies that came across my desk was the U&T visa certification and policy. And basically back in 2000, Congress created this program where victims of trafficking and violence under the Violence and Protection Act created an opportunity for, if people were subject, if they're undocumented individuals and they were subject to human trafficking or violent crimes, and they worked with law enforcement and they worked with prosecutors and they came forward and they reported these crimes, it would give them an avenue, or a small avenue anyway, for police departments to certify that they were cooperating with law enforcement. This is an opportunity for us to me as a police chief to certify that they actually worked with us and they cooperated with law enforcement and the prosecution, and it helps them take a step in trying to get a visa. It doesn't guarantee anything, but it definitely could help them in their process, individuals in the process to get a program to become to get a visa within the country. So I think it's an opportunity to show our community that we're willing to take that step, and also for a law enforcement side of things, it also helps because people who are victims of crimes, if they are afraid to come forward because of their cultural background and they're afraid of police, this is a way for us to show, hey, listen, if you've been victimized, if you've been sexually assaulted, if you're a victim of human trafficking, please come forward and we will help you. It's not going to be a hurtful thing for you to come forward. So that's what this first policy is. I know that going through the policy, there was some color edits, and Jim and I have had conversation in the past in front of the board here about the difference between the words shall and may, and I definitely wanted to make sure, well, in my world, those are very big words, and they mean a lot of different things, and so I wanted to make sure that I shall do things, and that the board understood that I am going to do those, and it's not just that I may do it, is that my commitment that I'm going to do these things. And this is really put on the police chief, not so much the officers, but they do know that it's coming. This was a conversation I've had with the union. It's a resource for the officers to use. If they run into somebody in the street, they can say, hey, this is what our police department does, this is what our chief believes in, and so here's an opportunity for us to do something that's right, so.
Yeah, great. So I have just my first sort of general question, just to be clear. So this is for undocumented individuals who are potentially being abused here. It's not like they've come here and escaping from
Correct.
overseas. Okay.
So,
that-
and
I just wanted-
we've had cases in Stowe where individuals where we've gotten reports later from family members or friends that people were afraid to come forward to the police to talk to us. So we made arrangements to, convince, and assure them, not convince them, but just tell them it's okay to come forward. We're not going to, we're not going to try to call ICE or anything like that.
Right.
if you're reporting a crime here. You know, we're here to help you. It doesn't matter what your status is to us. We're gonna help everybody. And so this is just another resource for us to use
Great,
to get people to come in and not be afraid to report things.
absolutely, great. I think it's amazing and wonderful to see that you're doing this. This is great. Comments or questions?
I was just going to say, I think this is exactly the type of policy we should have. I loved hearing about Mr. Salvi talking between shall and may as a corporate attorney myself. And I like that it's shall, because the serious conversation here is that discretion in these areas haven't proven to be helpful, but mandates have. And so I like the shall. I think it shows where we need to be as a town. I like that I see them in red because it actually helped me look to see whether the policy was actually mandating or whether it was discretionary. So I'm incredibly excited about this. I'd like to say thank you for bringing this policy forward. I think it shows where we are as a community, our values as a community, and frankly, what you're doing as a police chief in our town. And you know, having talked to folks about this and seeing it, there's excitement in our town, seeing policies like this, because it's truly what I think our town needs to be doing in building up our police department to be the one looking forward. So I'm incredibly excited and look forward to voting this in.
Can I second what you said?
You can do that too.
No, thank you. Thank you again for bringing this forward, Mike.
I just had, go ahead, yes, Jim, go ahead.
I just wanna say, thanks, Mike, I get it now, some things are in red or blue or underlined, because you're just trying to emphasize them for us, and I really do appreciate that. And I agree with Zach that the whole policy is, a great idea, and I'm glad you're bringing it forward, thank you.
I had just really, well, two questions. One was, you said this more about your job as chief to be enforcing this. Is there training for the department on, you know, sort of the same sort of sensitivity training we've talked about in other areas, you know, so that, I don't know how you train someone.
For this policy,
Yeah.
directly.
Yeah.
Other than I'm going to be issuing it and talking to the officers about what it's for and what they can use it for and how they can use it. The other policy that I'll be talking about in a minute, that there is some additional training on that policy itself.
Okay.
But on this one, this is more for us to review cases, and the officer's they will all know that this is an opportunity for them if they come across somebody that they, you know, again, it's just one little step gives that person an opportunity to help them. It's not a guarantee, it's just saying, hey, they worked with law enforcement, they were cooperative, they, you know, they did their part, they did the part that we asked them to do, so.
Right, great, great. Do you have anything to add?
I do not.
Okay,
I support the policy.
great. So I will take a motion.
I move that the select board vote to approve the UNT visa certification policy 9.02 as presented by Chief Michael Salisi.
Second.
You know, I just realized, I just make sure, I had just one question. I think it was actually in the text of there's I'm just trying to find it now. Is this the one that it talked about the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer?
I think you're in the second one.
I'm on the second one,
Yeah.
okay, I'm jumping ahead, okay. I'll take a vote, all in favor of this policy?
Aye.
Aye, all right, it's unanimous, thank you, Mike. Excuse me, Chief. And then the next policy is reporting abuse, oh, that's refuse.
So I hear you already have a question on that. I must have missed something. So this was
Yeah.
the reporting misconduct really, and it's reporting abuse, excessive force, misconduct by law enforcement. This came out of the current police reform and under the Mass General Law and the CMRs that have been developed. Under the new police reform bill, we have to develop police departments have to develop a policy and implement a policy for law enforcement personnel, including but not limited to law enforcement officers, to report abuse by other law enforcement personnel, including but not limited to law enforcement officers, without fear of retaliation or actual retaliation. So a lot of what I presented came right out of the statute and from guidance from other departments. With that, the first step of what I did do is I talked to the union and I presented it to them. Because say this is law, we want you on board. We already have a rule in place about reporting violations. We've had it since 2002. There's actually a regulation that we have in our department that you have to report any violation, rule, law, immediately, and if you don't, you get in trouble. So we've had that on the books for quite a while. Then looking through the policy, this is going to just reinforce our transparency through the town and hold the officers more accountable. On top of that, like I said earlier, there's some of the training. So I have 2 certified officers right now, Lieutenant Thrain and Sergeant Gogan. I went to half of the training, but it's called ICAT, and it stands for Integrating Communications Assessment and Tactics. And really what it's diffusing and de-escalation, and it's a way to handle violent calls, but in a non-violent manner. And you're trying to de-escalate and diffuse. Well, part of that too is diffusing us and diffusing officers, and being able to stand up to other officers and how to do that. So I have 2 certified instructors, and that they're gonna continue, they're going to start training the other officers to become trained in this, not only this policy, but in that tactic as well.
So I just,
I'm sorry.
yep, go ahead.
And then I know there's a lot of talk about like holding officers accountable for their actions. There is with the police officer standards and trainings, which is post, they've started the division of standards, which is made up of all civilians. You can't have any law enforcement background, and they're actually going to be doing the investigation. So any complaint that comes in on an officer within 2 days under the law has to be sent to post. And then even if I recommend disciplinary action to the board here, they can actually come down with a tighter punishment. So if we recommended suspension and they recommend decertification, well, it's decertification, and then that officer's career is done. So it's not just the police department looking at it, it's this outside civilian agency that is now looking at all complaints.
So one of the things I was struck by in reading it was that, the sort of, it addresses the sort of, the peer pressure potential of, you talk to one person, your immediate supervisor, they don't really respond, and sort of goes up the chain. So it uses the term chief executive officer, which I'm assuming for us means the town administrator. It's under Section 5 Procedures, A number 3. Cause it's basically the highest it goes, essentially if the chief isn't responding, so I'm assuming that means
There's
our
always,
town
right, and there's always an appeal process, like, if an officer has a problem with another officer, they should go to their supervisor or their sergeant. If it's with their sergeant, they go to the lieutenant. If it's with the lieutenant, they go to the chief. If it's with me, they go to Denise. If it's with, if it keeps going up, it goes in front of you, and we keep escalating. Hopefully, we don't have to use this policy at all. But it's there if we do.
It's there. It gives, and I think
And then the officer who reports it shouldn't be retaliated against.
Right. And that's why I thought, it was good to see that, that it's right in there. It's like, this is exactly what happens if you're not satisfied, or you feel like you weren't listened to, or whatever, so. Do we need to change the language from chief executive officer to
I
town
can
administrator?
change that.
I would recommend that you change that so it's clear.
It's just clear, other comments or questions? Jim?
I have one thing, Mike, this is a very important cultural change, not just a policy change or a legal change, and I have every confidence in you and in the management of the department and in the training that you described. My question is, you said you reached out to the union. How on board with this are they? Because personally, I don't believe that this kind of cultural change is going to occur without the police unions being fully on board with it.
So I can just talk about the local union. I can't talk about the wider, picture of the, I can just say from the officers that I talked to that they were on board with this. It's already happening. Not that they're reporting misconduct, because I would report that immediately. But officers to say are willing to come forward and say, I don't like this, whether it's within something that we're doing at the department, or if it's even equipment or training, how they're training a new officer, what they're seeing as a review thing. I think they understand that we're in a new world of policing. I think that it's really comes back on them if they don't report it, and that they can become decertified. So if you're caught up in something and you don't report it, then your career is going to end too. So I think that was a real hard shift, and they understand that now.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
What's that?
You have a hand raised.
Oh, do I have a hand raised? I'm sorry. Ms. Morgan, do you have a comment or a question?
I do. Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to the chief for doing this, and thank you to the select board for being supportive, at least of the first policy and the second policy as well. So far, at least from how you're discussing it, I think it's really important that this is happening, and I echo what Mr. Salvi was saying, that it's a really important cultural change, and I just want to tell you how grateful I am that you're doing it. So thank you again for doing that. And you already answered all my questions I had already, so thanks.
Great, thank you. Good. Yes.
I do have one thing. It goes back to the chief executive officer question, because that was the one phrase that flagged me, because I do think that when it comes to the current chain of command, it should be the chief administrative officer. But this policy goes a step beyond that, which is also including high-ranking officers or members of government. And that, I believe, does need to be the chief executive officer of the town. And I do want to make sure that it's clear that in our charter, this board controls investigations. And if that's what this is getting towards with some of the larger offenses that were the examples section, which I think is beyond, you know, we're now talking about there being a conspiracy of some board member with the chief to do something like that. I mean, that's the depth that this policy is getting at.
Right.
It does need, in my opinion, to say chief executive officer. So I'm wondering whether we could add a sentence in that does talk about how that process can happen, and leaving the chief executive for these remaining large, offenses that are truly about corruption, conspiracy. I think that should be left to this board and be reported to this board should that be something that happens. But I agree with that, so I think it's just adding that sentence in there that says, right, that if there's a complaint on the chief, then it would go to the chief administrative officer, right, that's where the complaint would go initially, and then the rest of them are left to this board.
So do you think the language needs to be added? If we had just changed the chief executive officer to town administrator, should we add sort of the next tier, or?
So may I add, the policy is misconduct by law enforcement personnel. I think the fact that we're adding other members of the government into this policy is sort of blurring this a little bit, because the whole policy is about law enforcement. We could certainly put another policy about government officials and employees and what to do with abuse, or it wouldn't really be excessive force, but we could certainly, I think we could certainly put in there something like, as the chief alluded to, there's always the ability to take it up another level, to grieve it further. We could certainly articulate that. My concern would be, quite frankly, this body doesn't have the opportunity to field a complaint. So if someone couldn't come to you and complain unless they're sitting here in front of you. It has to go through me to get to you as an executive session and rise to that level. So I think we need to take that into consideration, because someone can't go to you directly, Megan or Ellen or Zach, so there has to be a balancing act that when we're talking about law enforcement personnel, it has to really follow that, either the formal chain of command or come to me, that then I would involve you all.
Right.
Because you can't act,
Separately.
obviously we had a situation with a law enforcement personnel. It was very difficult. There had to be an emergency meeting, and I know Jim could speak to it since he was chair at the time. He was really doing things that the town administrator should have been involved with, but he didn't have a choice and he had to fill in that role. So it does get a little, it gets a little difficult when it's the board as the body to be reported to, because you can't take that
Right.
unsolicited or anywhere other than a public forum.
Yeah, and especially from my perspective, where you would be eventually the, you know, the reviewers of like, and you would hear, you know, so to be an investigator, the way I look at it in my head, you know, my world is like, you're gonna be an investigator and the judge at the same time. You can't really, you know, you wanna hear the facts for the first time when you make that decision, right? So you can't be both, but that's why I could change it to the town administrator. And you know, if it goes up from there, then it goes up from there, it would go to your board too. And again, like I said though, it could be a, and the board could come back with a decision that's, you know, under what the state's gonna do anyway too, and then, cause they, you know, so.
I would say for this one, change it to town administrator and then strike or members of government. Because this policy really does not pertain to anyone other than law enforcement personnel. And we can certainly work on that, if we would like a policy for corruption and abuse for members of government.
Can I just add something?
Oh, sorry.
I'm sympathetic to what Zach says because, I mean, certainly you could imagine if there were a different town administrator, of course, you know, something like a widespread ticket fixing scheme and the town administrator is in on, particularly one who lived in town, and an officer knows about it and wants to do something about it. But there is language in the charter, which I don't have in front of me right now, about the select board initiating investigations of the town administrator. So if that nightmare scenario were to occur, I think that there's something that covers it. So I think that we're good just leaving this policy to cover strictly the law enforcement chain of command up to the town administrator. Does that make sense?
Sorry.
Go.
No. My one question where it does say or including high-ranking officers or members of government, I think what that sentence was trying to do was law enforcement officers as they're relating to members of government. So I don't know, to me reading that, that's not like the member of government is not the person who is in trouble there. It is I don't know. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
So I think it's actually fine to leave it, but I don't.
Basically, that an officer could be implicating, trying to say bribe, just for lack of a simple word.
Yeah, a member of government, but it's not, the member of government is not the one who's being called out there, it's the person who is doing it.
The officer.
I'm not articulating this the right way.
No, you are, and it's the core part of my concern.
Okay.
And where I hear what you're saying, and I agree up to the extent that I think that somebody should be able to go to the chair of the select board who can also call a meeting, who can also go into executive session, who can do everything. That's the power of our chair of our board. And so if there is something, I think that is the person, because you have the full authority to call the meeting, to do the executive session, especially as Mr. Salvi points out. If we had a different town administrator, we're talking a very different situation, but we're setting the policy to set it, I think, for the long haul. And so to me, that's what I think with this one in particular. And I do have one more thing that I am concerned about here that I'd like to address, but I wanted to resolve that one first.
Yeah, but I think to go back to the chief's point, if a member of the department goes directly to the chair, then you can't be the sort of hearing and the arbitrator in the matter, because you would be the ones weighing in on the investigation.
We have the rule of necessity, right? So at the end of the day, if somebody does bring it to the chair, that we can declare on the board a rule of necessity, and we still operate under our charter 3-2E, where we lead investigations.
Right, but then they can't appeal it to anyone other than you. There's no place they would have to appeal it to the state at that point, because you would be the appealing officers of someone coming to me and still being aggrieved by my decision. They would appeal it to you all. They would not have any opportunity to do that if you are the one actually conducting the investigation.
Right.
So just keep that in mind. I mean, I don't think, nor do I envision us ever needing this. We have a wonderful staff here, but, so either way, so if you do keep that, you have to keep that in mind, there's no place to appeal it other than the state, the courts, whatnot.
Right.
This is getting a little too legal for me, in terms of where to go with it, except for that I'd say, we leave the language except for the change for the CEO, and then do a little more thinking about whether we need a separate policy based on what the charter says. And we can address more. of the big-
Just so I understand, and I know there'll be a motion when we're done, and you have more questions. So right now, you're thinking of two different things. You're thinking of doing a policy for the rest of the town. And then also, but making a change for this policy, correct? And then making that change to say from the CEO just to the town administrator.
Right.
Right
Right now, I think that's the only change right now we've
That's
agreed.
right now.
We wanna do
Okay, I
that.
just wanna
Right.
understand that. Thank you. Okay. And Zach, what was your?
The other thing, Madam Chair, that I was thinking about here is, I'm a strong believer in reporting separately to a non-officer if necessary. And I actually wanted to, so it's interesting that we're in this chief administrative, because I'd actually would like that if there is uncomfortability reporting in the ranks, that they can come to you. And I would like that in the policy, because to me, although I trust the chain of command to the extent, sometimes you're saying, I need to go talk to somebody else because it deals with my LT and my, my sergeant, and I don't know if I want to go to the chief about it. I know he talks to the lieutenant all the time, again, I'm thinking young officer, I'm thinking, if they're in a position where they've seen something egregious, of course I would like for them to feel comfortable coming to you. But if we can have some flexibility.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I believe this is why we've hired an HR person. And I believe that situation rises to an HR thing. And so I would be fine, because I do hear what you're saying, absolutely. Because, and I think it goes back to Jim's culture change, like, that the trust that's gonna be there is going to take time to build up, right? Like if there, it has not necessarily been the culture that you could report without retaliation. And now all of a sudden we're saying, great, and now you can report with no retaliation. I think people are still gonna are gonna, hold on to that. So I do like the idea of there being kind of a middleman, even if it's just the opportunity to be able to do it while people get their feet underneath them with the comfort level.
I can see that, but there's also, it's a big jump around going throughout when you go outside the chain of command.
Right.
And what is that complaint? I'd have to think about that. I would have to put some thought into that. I wanna give the opportunity for people to come forward if they see something. I think I've created an environment where people can come forward. However, if they are still that nervous, well, I think that's the bigger issue. Then why are they still nervous?
Right.
And hopefully that this is what this policy will do, is we'll turn around and say, well, you don't have to be nervous anymore.
Right.
You're not gonna suffer any negative consequences by coming forward.
Right.
And I think that for some things, jumping outside the chain of command is not appropriate. Sometimes it could be. There's always that option. I mean, I would put it as an option maybe, but not as something that they have to do.
No, option entirely.
Yeah.
Completely agree with optionality. I would never mandate that, because I do think, again, the hard part of this policy is I have to think about when you're not the chief,
Right.
because that's the policy we're putting in, and so that's what I'm thinking is,
And just so
we
you're
have
aware,
that
this
situation.
could actually, I could be back in another few months and changing this too, because the law could change. CMRs could change, but, it would just I'd have to really think about like that statement about, going to somebody, skipping out. Cause if you have a problem with your sergeant, the next step would go to Darren, go to the lieutenant. Don't go, what is that problem? And then we're flooding Dolores's office with all minor, things that we could have resolved fairly quickly.
Well, and also, this isn't just it's not just an HR policy. This is about reporting abuse and
Yeah.
problems within the department. So that's why I guess I do just make a distinction between that and anybody can have an HR issue, a true like, I'm not getting the sick time I deserve, or
Right.
whatever, and those are the things that's why we have HR. But for this, this is explicitly about how the department's behaving, or someone in the department's behaving about their professional work. So I do feel like, as someone who's never been in the military or never been in the police department, but I totally appreciate that this is where you gotta build the trust right there, and you gotta believe that people are gonna trust moving up to that next step, yeah.
Well, and I would say, quite frankly, item 3 sort of gives them that out. that if they really are uncomfortable, they could say they feel it's highly egregious. They could say that they're very uncomfortable and, concerned for X, Y, and Z, and it gives them the opportunity to come to me.
Okay.
Right.
But I mean, I would agree with Mike that, there should be, if someone's concerned with the sergeant, the lieutenant, there's the chief, there's, and then certainly if someone came and said, I have concerns with all of them, it's a different situation, but I think giving them the opportunity to go to the next higher level should really be the first stop, unless they feel that it's highly egregious, and like I said, they could pretty much claim that it is if they're really that uncomfortable.
And they still have the option too, I mean, they still have the option to report things through the courts. They still have the grievance procedure, they still have the collective bargaining agreement, they still have all legal action that they could still take in place, cause that wouldn't, just because they took a separate action, going through the grievance process or going through court process, this policy would still hold up, that they wouldn't be retaliated against. So they still have that option within this policy to do that.
You okay with that? More thoughts?
My core is that I still believe in having a separate reporting process. I think that if we're talking about standard, we're talking small things, their uniform isn't tidy, some of these other things,
So-
chain of command sits, but I think it's because of the level of actions we're talking about here, right? This is abuse, excessive force, misconduct. These are the most serious things, and part of what the spirit of, I think, the bill that passed through, and I think it's correct, is recognizing that the hierarchy structure may not necessarily be the right structure to weed out some of these issues. And so that's why, to me, when I think about this policy, especially at this level of egregiousness, I sort of bring that spirit through this and say, if we're talking about truly reporting abuse, excessive force, or misconduct, I struggle to think how any three of those doesn't automatically mean that they can come to you under this policy. But I want to make sure that that's clear, that's what we're saying, right? Because this isn't a policy for, they are speeding in their cruise vehicle, they're not wearing their seatbelt. Like, that's chain of command. That is not this policy.
So there is an avenue through the state too. Because none of this has to be reported to the town. It can go right to post. And it can get initiated there from that third party. So that's also part of the new reform law too. So nothing could even come this way, and we wouldn't even know about it, because they have their own commission, their own committee, they have subpoena power, and they have a right to do their own investigations. So things may happen, people could report things to them without anybody knowing.
Right, I think to Zach's point, everything in here is highly egregious, so, so if they understand that they always have that option, I mean, maybe it could be worded differently, but I think, certainly if someone were to come to me, I would ask, have you spoken to the chief? And if they say, no, I'm not comfortable, then that would be a different conversation. If they said, no, I haven't, should I go speak to him? It would be, if you're comfortable doing so, or I'll call the chief here and we'll have a conversation. But I think, I would agree that anything that we're talking about is highly egregious and needs further review.
And this is for law enforcement against law enforcement too, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So.
Is there a consensus on what I suggested? In the language that's already there? Is that how we're all reading that?
Jim, right?
Jim, did you have a thought?
I thought that 5A2 and 3 taken together should make clear to any officer that if they suspect serious abuse or misconduct, they can go to the next person in the chain of command who they do not suspect of misconduct, up to and including the chief or ultimately the town administrator. I would hesitate to put anything, I'm very skeptical of skip level stuff to begin with, but I'd be very hesitant to put anything more explicit that allows skip level reporting in a paramilitary organization, which, let's face it, that's what all police are. I thought that the message Mr. Burns is appropriately trying to get to was sufficiently conveyed in 5A, 2, and 3. That was my personal opinion.
Yeah, I have to say, I think I'm comfortable with this language at this point.
Yeah, and I think as, again, if we change the chief executive officer to the town administrator, and I think it seems like there is not a fail-safe, but it seems like there's also language in the charter that Jim was referring to, that kind of covers us on that end, so.
I think that's a separate issue though. I think
Right.
that's for you guys if you wanted to initiate something
Yes.
on us, but
Yes.
this is really.
This is really you,
I want the officers to hold themselves and the other officers accountable.
Yep.
And so that's what this is really to
Yep.
drive at. This is to say, they saw something, they didn't like it, they didn't think it was right.
They felt
And instead of like not, just keeping it to themselves, they can come forward and say, hey, listen, this is what I saw. And from my perspective, as chief or the lieutenant or the sergeants, they can say, all right, let's look at it. This is what we're gonna look at, and instead of just saying, yeah, we're not listening to you, or, you're a new person, what do you know, kind of thing. No, we're gonna take your reporting seriously. And that's what I believe this is for, not for, not the, your I don't want, I can't touch your policies, but you guys come up with those on your own.
So,
I'm comfortable
I
making a
think, are
motion.
you ready for the
yeah,
motion?
okay.
Okay.
We're gonna for clarity, we're gonna change chief executive officer under 5A3 to chief administrative officer, or would you prefer town administrator under the charter? Do you have a preference there? Let's do town administrator, I think.
Yeah, let's,
Yeah, I
that's
think
what,
so,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so I will take a motion.
I move that the select board approve the reporting abuse, excessive force, or misconduct by law enforcement personnel policy 9.03 as presented by Chief Michael Solisi with one modification, and that is under section 5A3, chief executive officer shall be replaced by town administrator.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Right, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Unanimous, thanks, chief.
Thanks, chief.
Thank you. Appreciate their time, thank you
Great
very
job.
much.
Thank you.
Appreciate the discussion.
Keeping it lively at 8:30.
That's right. Oh, I'm sorry, Abby, did you actually have a final comment? I just saw your hand was up. Or that was
Oh,
just
that
a
was from
thumbs up,
before, I
oh, that
think.
was a thumbs up.
No, I was just saying yay.
All right,
Sorry, that's
great.
it.
All right, thank you. Thanks, good
Thanks,
night.
chief.
And now we get to hear from our new assistant town administrator. Hi, Dolores.
Yes.
Nice to have you with us.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So more policies to talk about.
That's good. We actually like this because it means we're moving forward on policies that might have been missing in the past, so.
She's been writing feverishly.
Yeah, right. So let's see, we start with, the first one is the personnel records law. I have to keep switching back and forth here, so. I don't know if you need to introduce anything about it, anything you wanna say about the first one, the records policy, records law policy?
Just briefly, I'll just mention this law went into effect back in 2010. It allows the individual, the employee, to get access to their own file. It requires us to tell them within 10 days if we're putting anything negative in. And also, if we get a subpoena for their personnel records, we do let them know that we're going to release them. I think this is good for all of us. As far as the public records piece, I think most public employees know their salary is public, but they probably aren't aware that their resume is public when redacted, their job description, their job title. So I was thinking of just adding a sentence that says, although most information in the personnel file is confidential, some information is subject to public record, such as name, job title, job description, and wage or salary information. I think that will just help prevent confusion. There is certainly a lot in the confidential personnel file that can't be released, but there are some things that can.
Right.
So that's really it.
That's-
Questions?
Well, this is sort of a question just generally, so we always vote committee members as special town employees. Do we have to say that we're explicitly excluding special town employees from this policy? I mean, we don't really have, well, as far as I know, we don't have personnel records on special town employees.
We do not.
Does that need to be, I don't know if it needs to be stated or not, but it just, no,
I would say no.
It's probably not.
It's,
'Cause-
cause it says full part-time, but I don't know if it's part-time like,
Right, and
like
then.
a part, like you work a certain, you know what I mean?
And another one said something about paid and appointed positions, but I'll get to that later, so. Okay, any questions or comments about the first policy? Jim, do you have any questions? Personnel records law policy?
I like it, especially with the amendment that Dolores is suggesting. I had that same concern myself.
So I thought that was in there, but was that maybe in something else where, I thought you had written something about the sort of specific things that might be available? Was that not in this motion?
There's a couple of examples under the definitions, but to, mention the public records law, I think might be helpful.
I'm just, personal records. So do we have some specific language we should just add in? I'm not sure where the best way, maybe in the policy, maybe just as almost like a last note or something?
I was thinking of putting it on the second page and make a bullet above employee review of personnel file.
Yep.
I just put a bullet there stating although some information is confidential, some information may be public record, such as name, job title, job description, wage, salary, and resume. And resume is public, although you redact private information, such as phone number, address, email address. If they were self-employed, you would redact that.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I'm certainly
Yes.
comfortable just leaving the exact wording to Dolores. I think she's
Okay,
described it
Yeah.
substantively.
I think we
And
get it,
I've had cases where public employees think that because their job description is in their personnel file, that it somehow becomes private. It's good to clarify something like that.
okay. So we'll just maybe add language in the motion that says with a minor change, clarification on what information may be part of public record. Or something. Any other comments or questions on this one? I will take a motion, Mr. Burns.
I move that the select board vote to approve the personnel records law policy as presented by Assistant Town Administrator, HR Director Dolores Hamilton, including as presented the language that Dolores presented to the select board.
Second. They can figure that out, right? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, that is unanimous. And then the next is the domestic violence leave policy. Again, any,
Okay, this,
yep,
whoops.
no, go ahead.
I'll just do a quick overview. This law went into effect in August of 2014. Essentially, we have to give up to 15 days per 12-month period for an employee to go to court or do whatever they need to do because of a domestic violence situation. We do, and the law does recommend they tell everyone in advance and that they show the court order that they have to be there. I think the law is pretty specific. We just added to the end of the law some resources to get help. There was a typo here. And it was just a blank C. It should have been just town.
I love that. I was like, I'm trying to figure out what could C stand for? Okay, that's on the
City.
top
It
of
was
Probably
page
city, yeah.
2. If you hadn't noticed it, it says, after the general law, chapter C 149. You must notify the C within, so, okay, great. I'm actually sad to hear how long ago this passed the state, but thank you for bringing it forward. I actually didn't know there was such a law, so this is really great actually to hear. Sad.
You know, this is one of those that I could have sworn the town had a policy like this because I remember discussing this at a select board meeting, but
Okay.
who knows?
Well, we wanna make sure it's there, so we don't have to worry about, what's the word if you override a previous law? I don't know what the word
No,
is.
if we do find that there is one in place somewhere, this will override it
It will,
anyways.
okay, great. Any other comments or questions on the domestic violence leave policy? Okay, then I will take a motion, Mr. Burns.
I move that the select board vote to approve the domestic violence leave policy as presented by Assistant Town Administrator, HR Director Dolores Hamilton, with such Scrivener's error being fixed.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
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 That's unanimous, thank you. And the next is the personnel request policy and form.
This policy is truly just so that we have a fair and consistent process across all departments. I think, I mentioned that the manager responsible for hiring is usually the department head. We could probably cut that down and just say department head all the time. But the intent is just to make sure not only every vacancy or every new position is filled in a fair and consistent manner, but we have all the information we need when we advertise and interview. So the form is attached in the back, and that's really to help me make sure that we advertise everything correctly.
That's great. So this is where, when it says applicability, it says all paid and appointed positions. And I know the intention is not for the committee appointments, but it seems like maybe, is there a better way to describe,
We could just remove the word and.
paid, appointed, right, because
Paid
basically
appointed,
these are paid,
because, yeah.
right, it's paid positions,
Or
right?
actually,
Do we need
I should say
appointed?
that, no, because the staff that I hire, they're not technically appointed. They're just hired. So I would say, it could just say all paid employees or all paid employee positions
That's
in
what
the
I was
town.
thinking, we don't need to use the word appointed for anything.
No,
We'll
I think we could
exclude
remove the word appointed. All paid employee positions in the town, I would say.
Yeah, that sounds good.
it. There's some consistency around posting for committees, might not be a bad idea, but that's not Dolores's fault, that's that's our job, so. Any other questions or comments on the personnel request policy? Jim, anything? Okay.
No, I agree with it. Hiring has become such a minefield in the last 30 years that it's necessary now to really centralize control. I remember doing this at my job with a lot of pushback from department heads, but I'm glad to see this done here.
There was a few grumblings at the department head meeting,
There was,
but we'll centralize it.
right. Well, and I would think particularly with the sort of per diem kind of positions and that, they probably don't wanna have to deal with process as much, or is that not fair?
No, I don't know that's, I just think it's, so many departments are used to just hiring who they want.
Right.
It happened not that long ago, all of a sudden someone's here like, oh, meet my new employee, and Dolores and I were like, wait a minute, what is happening? So this is just, again, no one can be hired until a form is filled out, Dolores goes through the process, I approve that there's money in the budget, there's a known position,
Right.
and then she really spearheads that process. And then over time, it may be that, she gives, depending on the position, she may give leeway to the department head to conduct interviews and then recommend to her and I. She may be involved in the interviews, that will be up to her discretion based on the positions that we're filling. Prior to her arrival, I've allowed, like when we hired the assistant planner, Jesse and his group, they conducted interviews, recommended a candidate, I then had a final interview and then hired him. So it'll be similar along that lines, we'll just add Dolores in the mix to really make sure there's a process, everything is consistent, the same messages are being put out, the same posting, the same format is going out, so.
Well, and it's obvious, but the more evenly the hiring is, the more likely we get a more diverse workforce that isn't just about people that people know.
Right.
Right, so.
Right, and that's part of it, we wanna make sure that, we wanna see resumes or applications of people who came in and get a better understanding of why someone was chosen, like if we weren't involved in the process, that's important, so that if someone says, why was my next door neighbor hired, we have a reason, we can explain that, so.
Right.
I'd just like to add one thing.
Sure.
This is how we hire the best,
Yeah,
Right.
and that's
absolutely.
what I'm excited about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, with that, I will take a motion.
I move the select board vote, excuse me, I'll delete that word, strike that. I move the select board approve the personnel request policy and form policy as presented by the Assistant Town Administrator, HR Director Dolores Hamilton, with a modification to remove "and appointed" from the applicability section of the policy.
Second?
All in favor? Aye.
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 All right, that's unanimous. Thanks so much, Dolores.
Thank you.
You've been busy.
Thanks, Dolores. We had to cut it down and only put 3 forward for tonight,
Yeah,
so.
well, so we'll be seeing
There'll
you
be
again. All right, sounds
There will be
good.
more.
Great. Thank you. Okay, ARPA update.
So, I'm not gonna reiterate this whole thing because quite frankly, I don't know if I could make it through. So the bullet points. As you're all aware, the federal government passed the American Rescue Plan Act. What that means for Stow is $2,162,292 broken down to direct aid and then county redistribution. So in other parts of the country, they have counties, they get the funds, we don't, but they still allocated it to the counties who then redistributed it. We have received half of that funding to date. So we have that, it's sitting in our account. Now we need to figure out how best to spend it. So I've articulated sort of the process. The difference between the CARES Act and ARPA. The CARES Act was overseen by the state, even though it was federal funding. So if we had a question on a project, we could submit a request. They would say, yes, it's approved, no, it's not approved. We don't have that luxury with ARPA. The frustration of everybody is there's one generic email address for the US Treasury that any inquiry for ARPA has to go to. Attorneys have been emailing, CPAs have been emailing, towns have been emailing, there has been no response, there's not even an automated response. So people are concerned because should you put forward a project and 5 years down the road, they audit it and say, that wasn't eligible, you're on the hook for that money. So we want to be very careful with how we're spending our money. There are sort of the 4 large categories. Public health, which and negative economic impacts, which is fairly broad, and some communities are doing tremendous things under that category. There are towns building dog parks and saying, oh, there's a negative economic impact. Our dogs had no place to go. There is, in public health, obviously, anything that we were paying CARES Act related specific to COVID. So the PPE, the testing, all of that still covers under the public health category. Premium pay, which is a tricky category. From what we've seen, there are not many municipalities issuing premium pay. It's really geared towards the lower level food store employees, bus drivers, things like that, that really are minimum wage, that had to work, had no choice to work throughout this. The towns that are even looking at it, it's been a difficult conversation because you have to decide who's eligible. If they worked remotely, are they eligible? If they worked remotely part of the time, are they eligible? So right now, really no municipality is actually giving out premium pay. I'm gonna come back to revenue loss. And then investments in water, sewer, and broadband. Obviously, we are not a water and sewer community. However, we can be a little bit creative with that. I mentioned in, I think, our last meeting that one of the projects will be PFAS, so instead of hitting the taxpayer up, we'll use some of this money to deal with our ongoing PFAS remediation. The culvert work, there is some culvert work in town that we think we can cover under the water infrastructure. The cisterns that Kate was able to get funding for, we would have, had on our list as projects, but we can now send that off to the state. We've talked about Lower Village. We could potentially use this money for the final study that we want to do in Lower Village. So there are those types of items. Again, we don't really need the broadband either because the town has access to broadband infrastructure. That's more geared to the western part of the state, which shockingly still does not have broadband, which is amazing to me. So, and then the revenue loss. The way the revenue loss is, it will look at fiscal 19 and compare it to calendar year 20. It's very bizarre that they're using a fiscal year than a calendar year. to determine what revenue, let me think how to phrase this. How our revenue compared in calendar year 20 to fiscal 19, and then just attribute it all to COVID. So for us, and for several smaller towns, we are at a disadvantage, although I do still believe we'll calculate a revenue loss, because it covers any revenue. We received over $1 million in grants that year, MassWorks, Green Communities, that all counts towards our revenue, even though it really was not regular revenue. And then we did not get that in calendar year 20, so. But if we are able to calculate revenue loss, which again, I do think we will based on the parameters they've given us and an inflation cost, we could then use the funding that we determine. I'm just gonna use, this is not accurate, I'm just gonna use round numbers for the sake of conversation. If we calculate $500,000 on revenue loss, that can be used for any purpose other than debt payments, putting it into stabilization. So we could then take that money and say, you know what, we want to buy a van for the Council on Aging. We have this revenue loss that we can use for any purpose.
Got it.
So that gives us much more discretion when it comes to how we can spend that amount of money. So again, there's a specific formula. They recommend that once we do a calculation, get our auditors to sign off on it, because ultimately they are gonna be working on the federal audit that we have to comply with. So in order to do that, and in order to start working with the departments to sort of get together a list and then come back before this board, I have hired a consultant, Capital Strategic Solutions. They are working with a number of communities, which I put on my memo here. And they will really sort of handle the administration side of this process. We actually uploaded reports to them today so that they could start calculating the revenue loss. And it is a rolling year, so the ARPA funds are 3 years. We can do a revenue loss for calendar 20, calendar 21, calendar 22.
Wow.
And so there is room each year or to figure out what our capacity is. So if we don't spend all 2 million, we can figure out what our revenue loss would be in the next year and say, okay, well, we have this for discretionary funds.
Still compared to fiscal 19, or?
It would be,
No, I believe it's still fiscal 19. I think that is the benchmark because that is the year before COVID. So I believe that's our benchmark for the years.
So
I'll clarify that, but I believe that's how they explained it. The consultant will handle, again, working, putting together a list and saying to us, yes, these projects will qualify, these projects will not. So that we can really come here and say, these are all of the ideas, and then figure out what you feel is, right in the right direction to use these funds. Obviously, some of it PFAS and the consultants, I've sort of already decided for you. But the rest of it, we'll figure out, where are our priorities? Where do we wanna see this money spent? We have this opportunity, so let's make the best of it. The consulting firm will do all of the audit reports. It does rise to a federal audit, so it's different audit requirements that we will have to comply with. And then all of the reporting, so there was supposed to be a report due, I think November 1st, and everyone's like, no one spent money, what are we reporting? They bumped that out till April. So they'll handle those reports for us, and then they'll handle any closeout filings or reports. So it's a great use, quite frankly, because someone who is just focusing on nothing but this can really advise us, and they can say, this is what they're doing in Pepperell, have you thought of this? Or this is what I've seen in these other communities. So I think it's great, the funding, I know there are people out there that are not happy that the federal government is just giving out all this money. But they've given it to us, so we've been told to spend it. If we don't spend it, they're gonna give it to somebody else to spend. Similar to the CARES Act, I think I turned back $58,000 that we couldn't spend after October 29th, and they're just gonna reallocate it to other towns who need to spend it. So we will find a purpose for these. I just started looking at some of the reports that we've put together of capital needs and some of our projects, and it could go pretty quickly in a short amount of time, so. I think it's great. I think it'll be a great community conversation. If the board wants to get the community more involved in some of the projects, we can certainly do that. There's public outreach that can be done. It really will depend on, what direction you wanna go in. Do you wanna see the list of priorities and have that conversation? Do you wanna see what the community needs are based on categories? which could be a little bit difficult because everyone might have different needs. But I think my recommendation would be when we come up with the revenue loss, maybe that's where we have some of those conversations. You know, do we wanna take X amount of money and not, you know, and buy, you know, spend it on capital so that we're not, again, applying that to the budget, that's something separate, it's not coming out of free cash. Is there a road that needs to be paved that we haven't been able to fund, here's money for that? Do we wanna do, you know, there's so many things that can be done with that sort of discretionary spending. So I do think that will be a much larger conversation once we figure it out. I would expect, we only have 2 meetings left this calendar year, I would expect we would really start having these conversations in January. I know, like really figure out like, these are the lists from the departments, let's start here and figure out where we wanna work from and what that discretionary amount is. So, there will be a lot, and the consultant will actually oversee the procurement of these projects too. So they'll make sure they're being followed, the procurement's being done, and they comply again with the federal requirements of Arpa.
It's fantastic.
So it's so fantastic. Cause I keep thinking like, if I have to do this and calculate this. So anyway, so that's just sort of a snapshot of where we are. You know, I've gotten calls from some board members like, well, what are we spending ARPA funds on? And my answer's been, we haven't really gotten to that point yet.
Right.
We'll have those conversations.
Right.
But I do think it should be a more in-depth conversation about, you know, what are some of these projects that we wanna just check off
Right.
and not then tax the residents on.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I will turn it over.
Oh, I wanted to just say I so appreciate the transparency in this process. Like I think it's great. I think, you know, allowing the community to have some kind of input, and even if it's a survey or just something, I think is helpful too, because it is a chunk of money, and I think that, you know, if we're able to creatively spend it doing improvements to the town, I am excited about it, so thank you.
Yeah, it's like a big
It's
one-time
like a nice
windfall,
windfall, and it's
it's
like,
just-
how do we
right,
like,
right.
you know, most bang for our buck.
And I mean, I definitely look at it as, because one of the things that started driving me crazy with the state is like splitting it into little tiny chunks. It's like, no, this is a huge, one-time, huge amount of money. Like, let's fund the things that we never seem to have enough money.
Right,
So-
right.
So I think things like Lower Village or, one point you had talked about, one of the possible sort of PFAS solutions, because it was all focused around this very small water supply we have here, was to actually just redo that whole system. Is that still something we're thinking about, or, I mean?
So it is, so the capital for this fiscal year, put aside maybe 35,000 to fund a water study of this system. So I actually spoke to Frank about it today. And he has someone coming in next week for pricing to do that. Cause there are potentials of, you know, he and I talked at length about the system and, you know, do we abandon the water system of this building and find a way to connect to the Pompo system, which is on an aquifer and has clean water and has much more capacity? Or do we invest in continuing to maintain this system with PFAS and whatever else is going on? And then there's the issue with the fact that we are providing water to one residence and a church. Turns out we're not billing them properly. So, you know, someone will look at all of that.
right,
We've
okay.
had continuous water main breaks in this infrastructure.
Right.
Mainly because it does extend down the road. So the water study will give us a better understanding of this system and give us some recommendations. And it could be, we have until December 2024 to spend this
Yeah.
one.
Right, It's- so we have plenty.
So we have time for, you know, if someone comes in and says, no, I really recommend you spend $1 million and do this.
Yeah.
That could be something we have a conversation and say, you know, is it worth using this funds to do that, to improve the water in this area?
Right.
Those would certainly be possibilities.
Well, it's something fun to look forward to. Yeah, go ahead.
I think I'm reading between the lines, but just wanna make sure it's clear on the strategy. If whatever you can use for your revenue loss is the way you go about it. So you maximize revenue loss because it actually frees up money for whatever it is. If it can fit into one of these other 3 categories, congratulations. I think the water one we're saying may be able to fit into one of the categories, so that's the one we're talking about. Otherwise, the goal really is calculate revenue loss, you'll come back to us with that number of what that may look like, and then we can proceed from there in that conversation of what's really tied up and what is not tied up.
Correct, I mean, we'll certainly have a conversation about what's tied up as well, if we can come up with other, water infrastructure updates. And as I mentioned, the negative economic impact is fairly broadly interpreted right now, so there may be some things that we can say, well, maybe it fits in this, so let's use money because I do think, I did a very rough calculation on a webinar last week on the revenue loss, and I came up with like $670,000. Because you do exclude some things, you have to add some other things in, and even though we had that $1 million in grant money, when you look at the calendar year, the way the revenue came in really was a different calculation. So let's say that's the case, we may say, we can do this under negative economic impact, then we don't need to touch that discretionary money because we know it will qualify for one of these other categories. Those are the conversations we will have.
Right.
I do think under, as far as public health, I can't expect to spend more than maybe $20,000 total with PPE that we're still buying, we're still doing COVID testing.
Right.
But those costs are so minimal.
Right.
Unless there was some opportunity to do, a vaccination clinic in town, but even that, we're sort of past that point, so.
Right.
And
I think the
PFAS,
public health,
does PFAS show up under public health, or that's just water?
it's considered water. I mean, we probably could, but once you get into those other categories, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, right.
It's just, it's that revenue loss that is the,
Right.
that is the key, cause that can really be used for anything. It does not need to fit in these categories, and that's where we really can be creative.
Right. Cool.
And the
Yes.
other comment I'd like to say is, I'm very much for having the community input on this, cause I think it's part of that broader conversation we're having about our capital priorities anyways, that I think this being part of that capital prioritization thing could be a really nice marriage between the two of having direct projects that we can fund outside of capital, and then also obviously the ones we'd like to do with it, so I'd like the idea of keeping those maybe together on a similar track, cause it could be two birds, one stone.
Absolutely. Great. Jim, any other thoughts before we move on?
Only that I focused on the hiring of the consultant because that's unusual. We don't hire a lot of consultants and stuff. And I think it's a good idea in this case. Number one, because of the highly technical nature of the issue, but also a lot like the personnel reclassification. A lot of different, everyone in town building is gonna have opinions on how the money should be spent. And it would be a good idea to have a somewhat objective outsider take a look at it and make some recommendations.
Yeah.
So I'm supportive.
Great, awesome. So we don't need to vote or anything yet? right?
Nope,
So we're just
you will at
moving
some
along.
point,
Yeah,
but this was just to give you an update
that's
of
great.
where we are with it.
Thank you. It's always good to have good news. So next is a letter of support for the I always get Stow Elderly Housing Corporation Plantation 2 project, which is delightful to see it's moving forward. You wanna give some
Madam
background? I'm sorry?
He's gonna have to.
Madam Chair, I'll have to recuse myself on this.
Correct. All right.
So,
Yes.
SCHC reached out back in 2012. The Select Board, Planning Board, maybe that's it, I'm trying to think of who else, sent in letters of support for the plantation project. So this is just to reiterate, they are looking for funding under DHCD. We are affirming that we still support this project, we believe in this project, it's extremely valuable to us. So I wrote an updated letter articulating what this application will be for. The application that SEHC is submitting for Plantation 2 will add 37 units, and then they plan to renovate 50 existing units of Plantation 1. So I think it's great. Obviously, we would love the state to support it and support funding for it as soon as possible.
Does this hopefully mean it's moving forward again?
They are planning to apply soon, so I have it on our agenda. I think it's on next Tuesday's planning board agenda. And then they will submit their application to the state.
Well, just a huge thank you for Stow Elderly Housing to stick with us, because they really have been the ones to create some amazing affordable housing in town, so very grateful for them. Any other comments on the letter?
The only thing I wanted to add was,
Yeah.
under select board chair figures on behalf of the select board, since we're all making the motion, I would prefer that just actually let them know that you're sending it on our
Yes.
behalf,
Sure.
since we're making, since I will now make the motion.
Yes, please do. We would love a motion.
I move the select board vote to approve the letter of support for SEHC for the Plantation 2 project and authorize the chair to sign it.
Second. Any other comment? Oh, right, he can't talk. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. There's 3 with Mr. Salvi abstaining. All right, just a reminder on strategic planning, we're meeting December 7th with Capital Planning and Finance Committee for the first hour, and then the second hour to talk about how we're doing on our own goals, and then goals for the second half of the year. And any comments on correspondence? No?
There was,
I'll just say we got another letter from Ms. Granite about our policy on Class 2 auto licenses. It's been reviewed multiple times by town council, and there is nothing more to be done as far as I understand. So I'm sorry they're not happy with that, but that's just what our council has told us. So we're gonna move forward on that. And if there's no other comments on correspondence, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
second,
All in favor?
aye.
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 Enjoy your week down there, Jim.
Pardon me?
Enjoy your week.
Thank you. Night, everyone.
Night, everybody.